Karen and I are both from Fort Fairfield, which is a little town up on the Canadian border in northern Maine and potato country. We were in school together, in grammar school. Then I moved to Belfast and graduated from Crosby High School and went to Rhode Island School of Design. Before I went to RISD, I had no art in school, so I taught myself from the time I was about 7 or 8, learned how to draw and paint myself. And my hero was Norman Rockwell. When I went to RISD, I discovered people like Willem de Kooning and Jackson Pollock and the abstract expressionists in New York, and I never quite got over them. So you can see their influence in my work, I think, those of you who are familiar with them. I went to RISD, went to Rome my senior year, and came back and was immediately drafted into the Army and ended up in Maryland. And was in Maryland a number of years and then went up to Philadelphia. I started a federal career, and I had a career with the government for 26 and a half years, plus my Army time. But all that time I was drawing and painting and teaching art sometimes, not really showing art, not really exhibiting. Karen and I moved to North Carolina for 4 years before coming back to Maine 10 years ago, back to Belfast. For the people here who aren't artists, I thought I would talk a little bit about why I went from Norman Rockwell to end up doing this stuff. And then for the artists, I want to say a little bit more specific later and recognize a few people who have influenced me. I should introduce my sister Cheryl too, by the way, I suppose. Cheryl is the other hand. I went to RISD and got to appreciate the abstract expressionists and a lot of other artists. But the thing I'd like to say, I guess, about abstract art is that it essentially doesn't rely on the storyline or the illustration of what's going on or the subject matter. And that interests me a great deal. I prefer that, having done realism for many, many years and experimented with a lot of different kinds of things, as some people know. But the thing that I really like about the abstract stuff is that the quality of the painting depends on the elements and the principles that, like line and tone and color and their relationships, which can bring you some kind of unity. And for people who are visually oriented, that becomes very exciting, maybe more exciting than what the subject is. So unlike Norman Rockwell's work, where a lot of his, and he was one heck of a painter, no question, but a lot of the people who appreciate him do so because of the story and the Americana and all that, which is wonderful. Same kind of thing with Andrew Wyeth in a way. But what interests me now, and has for some time, is dealing with these other elements. And if people are not visually oriented, maybe you like music, maybe you can think in terms of jazz or symphonies, where the composer really is dealing with the notes and the instruments and the sounds they make and their relationships. And that's why we love these pieces. I mean, you can say that the William Tell Overture is about William Tell or it's about the Lone Ranger, who knows? But it's probably about neither one of those things. In a sense, aesthetically, musically, it's about the relationships of those movements and the instruments and the different notes. And that's, I think, what I'm doing with, well, anybody's doing with the abstract stuff. So that interests me more, even though the subject matter creeps in, and sometimes I kind of go with the subject more in some paintings than in others. But the thing that's exciting about the abstract thing is that you do get some structure, and you're interested in the structure, and you hope other people get it, and that they follow where you want them to go in the elements of the picture. But that one of the great things that can happen is a surprise can happen. Something you didn't know about, didn't think about, and in that way you avoid trite, mundane images that float around in everybody's head, and you get beyond that and discover something brand new. I think that's the exciting part. For the artist here in particular, many of you know that you should know that I'm very much inspired by your work and influenced by it. Most of the artists that are here. And, but also, I'm very much inspired by Picasso, who I feel, if you had to have an artist for the 20th century, it would have to be Picasso, who reinvented the entire history of art and made it his own, and his own experimentation, and what he chose to do, breaking all the rules the way he wanted to. And strangely, the public appreciated it. And after that, I'd say the great American artist for me, in that vein, was Willem de Kooning, an abstract expressionist in New York, who I think was given the Medal of Freedom before he died a few years ago. And you know, Jackson Pollock, his friend, and Franz Klein, and maybe one of his friends and one who influenced his work, Arshil Gorky, was all kind of in the same vein there. The shapes and the creativity and what they were doing has greatly influenced my work. Here in Maine, my RISD professor, Robert Hamilton, who passed away half a dozen years or so ago, was living in Port Clyde. His wife Nancy was here last night, and I was hoping she might be here today, but she might get here yet. But he has been a big influence in recent years, mainly because I got to reappreciate his work. When I came back to Maine, or even before that, I discovered he was at Port Clyde, and I came to visit him several times. But a couple of years ago, I started a project with Nancy to do a website for him and a book on his work, because I think Robert Hamilton someday is going to be known as a really important American painter. A lot of people appreciate his work now, particularly in New England, but not the whole country doesn't know him yet. And I think it's a shame, because his work is unique. And I got the chance to not only go through his inventory of over 600 paintings down in Fort Clyde, and if, by the way, you ever get a chance to get out and you want to spend a couple hours, Nancy is more than happy to give you a tour through 3 buildings he built down there in a hayfield on Horse Point Road, which he called his museum. He kind of left RISD after having a career teaching there, and came up to Maine and just kind of jumped out of the art world, pulled out of his Boston gallery, and just painted every day, right up until he died at, I think, 87, something like that. So in that project, I got a chance to not only go over all this work that was hidden down there and stored away, but photographed a lot of it, and then wrote about him and put this book together, and with Terry Bonneville, we put together a great website. And that was telling me all the time why I loved his work. And one of the things about Hamilton is that he said that paintings have to be made out of whole cloth. They have to be produced out of improvisation, like jazz. That you don't know quite where you're going, but it takes you someplace, and you find the form as you're doing it. And the best part of the whole thing is the element of surprise. That was a big word, Hamilton. It's a big word to me, and a big part of what I think I'm doing here. And another major influence here in Maine, my good friend Harold Gard from Belfast, you're probably 87 now, I know, 87, and he's produced some mountain work, both in Maine and in Florida. I just got back from Florida. And I think of him as Maine's Matisse. When I first discovered his work, before I ever met him, I saw his barn full of stuff up in Belfast. And I thought, my God, who is this guy? And he's been painting like crazy ever since. I dare say, we're going in winter down in Florida. This morning. And I greatly admire Harold's work. And I think one of the quotes that's famous is something like, I don't trust pretty and I don't trust nice, he says. And I think what he means is that he's not painting to put together stuff that normally you would think is going to go together, not color schemes, not things that have forms and shapes that seem to fit together, but he likes to push the envelope, even at his age, and come up with stuff that maybe shouldn't go together, but he makes it go together. He makes it work. And so oftentimes he has a subject in his work, and people see all kinds of psychological ramifications of it, which I'm sure he knows and is thinking about. But I think that what he's trying to do is to have something where he discovers new ways of putting together lines, colors, shapes, and he has fun discovering these things. And he juxtaposes things that shouldn't fit, or he starts painting a surface and he quits in the middle of it, and you look at it and say, well, why did he stop? Why didn't he go to the edge? Why didn't he paint the whole thing blue? Well, that's because everybody else does that. Harold is making it work by stopping when he's happy with it. And so I have learned a good deal from him, and I don't pretend I figured out what he's figured out, but I'm heading that way. So I want to acknowledge Harold.